Welcome to the 9th Dharamsala International Film Festival. This is our first online edition. The conversation we are about to have was meant to be live, but due to unavoidable circumstances, we had to pre-record this session. Thank you for sending all your questions. We will try to accommodate as many of them as possible.
We're so happy to have with us today award-winning director Asif Kapadia, who's also on the DIFF Board of Advisors. Asif, it's really wonderful to see you and welcome to the 9th edition of the Dharamsala International Film Festival. You were here in the very first year of our festival, which was 2012. I know we had invited you to come and show Senna, and we actually never expected that you would, accept the invitation because no one knew about this festival at the time. So we were like really pleasantly surprised when you did accept and came with your wife and 2 kids. So, and I think we know that you do have a special connection with Dharamsala. So can you, let's talk about that a little bit first.
Yeah, well, great to see you both. Really, really nice to talk to you again. And it's incredible how quickly time flies. But, that's the danger of inviting someone. They might actually accept, watch it, and bring the whole family. For me, it was really a wonderful. I remember the email. I remember getting the email saying I would love to go, but it would be one of those things where I'd love to bring everyone because, for me, living in London, born in London, lived here all my life, but my family are from Gujarat, but I didn't really grow up spending any time in India. So for me, my experience of India and the Himalaya has come out of making films. It's been making my student film, The Sheep Thief, there with my wife, Victoria, but then also making The Warrior, particularly, was a kind of profound experience of scouting. It was my first feature, so it was the time when we didn't have a big crew. We didn't have kids then. We were young, and you did everything yourself. So we scouted, my friend Amit and I, who studied at FTI, all of the desert. And then we literally were like, let's go and scout the Himalayas because, I want the film to start in the desert in Rajasthan and I want it to finish in the Himalaya. And so then we would drive around. And during the scouting, I came to Dharamsala and we looked around there. We ended up filming in Manali. We wanted to go to Ladakh, but we weren't able to go to Ladakh, and we traveled up the Rotang Pass. And so a lot of these places I saw back in 1999, it would have been 1999, 2000 when we made the film. And then hadn't really been back until kind of your invite, and it was like, it would be wonderful to go back. My wife, Victoria, had come to Dharamsala when she was younger as a student and had been there when the Dalai Lama was kind of doing a prayer, and she had been there. So both of us had a connection to the region and wanted to come back with the kids.
Okay.
So that was the opportunity. Yeah. And it was an amazing trip. It was great. And, when I think back now, I didn't realize it was your first festival. I for some reason thought you'd done it before, but that's even better. Even better.
It was our first festival, and you were one of our first kind of international guests who came. And here we are 9 years later.
Yeah. Well done for it. Still, the fact that it's still going, even in this crazy times that we're living in.
Absolutely.
Congrats.
Thank you. And congrats on all these films you made, because, you came with Senna, but after that, there was Amy, that was amazing, and now Maradona. And of course, you've kind of gone on this whole new journey with that type of film that you've been making with archive and, stories about people who are really brilliant, but people who are also really suffering in some way. And I think watching all those films, one thing that really comes across is your empathy for them. They come across as people you really empathize well with, and they're not perfect people. They're really problematic people, yeah. And yet you feel that empathy. You think, okay, he messed up there, but I understand. And I think that's something very, very special. So do you want to talk about, I don't know where, some of that, where?
Yeah, I think it's a really good point that you mentioned it, Ritu, because I think I've always, I suppose if there's a theme that runs through all of the films that I've made, short films, feature films, drama, docs, they're all somehow about outsiders. They're people who are kind of always fighting against the system or whatever it may be that somehow is corrupt or somehow is working against them. And they're struggling to take on something greater than them, bigger than them, and they can achieve so much, but in the end, the system wins in a way. And I think one person looked at all of the docs and said, you know what they all have in common? They're all warriors, which I thought was a quite nice thing, you know. But the idea of these people who they're not the establishment, they're not part of the system, but they're somehow trying to take something on. So Senna was definitely like that. And to do that, you kind of have to do whatever you have to do to survive. And he was an amazing, incredible guy, and actually took on the kind of the fact that it wasn't safe and had all these other ideals that were bigger than just winning against a personal battle against his rival. And in a way, it was him dying that meant that sport changed, you know, the Formula One changed. And it was like the ultimate kind of sacrifice. And Senna had this kind of mystical, spiritual element to it, which is weirdly enough why it seemed to fit coming to Dharamsala to show it. You know, there was a connection with the kind of spirituality. With Amy, it was, you know, this young girl who was brilliant, who's a Londoner, and it was very much for me a film about North London, where I'm from, and where I've lived all my life. And her kind of being this unusual character who's kind of Jewish, but she's into jazz and she likes hip hop. And then she becomes a musician and becomes famous and becomes a star, but didn't really want that. You know, wasn't desperate for that, wanted to be free, wanted to be an artist. But by becoming famous, she loses the freedom and becomes a pop star, which for her was the worst thing. And then that film's really essentially just about love. It's about wanting to be loved, wanting people to care about her, whether it's her family, whether it's her partner, whatever, and all of the awful stuff that happens when those relationships get mixed up. The system of the media and also the audience's part in kind of making fun of people who are suffering, people who are not well. That became the kind of battle that she had, the struggle against tabloids, the struggle against these paparazzi, but also people who seem to enjoy clicking on those pages. Maradona's a different one because Maradona's like the street guy. You know, Maradona's the guy from a really tough, poor place who always will do whatever he has to do to survive and will be friends with whoever's in control. And he goes to Napoli, he goes to Naples, which was like very much a very big presence of the Camorra, the gangsters, the mafia in the south in Napoli. And also the kind of football, the way football was then. So his battle was with them, but also the nature of the film, Diego versus Maradona, almost was internally the struggle between the good side and the bad side of himself. And so that was the kind of the idea. I definitely only want to really deal with slightly complex characters. I'm not really interested in the good guys necessarily. Boring, you know. You want the edgy people, you want to make stories about them, but you want to kind of get the audience who may start off saying, I don't like him, he's a cheat. I don't like her, she was a drug addict. I don't like that guy, he crashed. You go, well, that's a good starting place. If the audience think they don't like someone, for me, that's the journey. Then you go on saying, well, let me tell you the story. And you think you know the story, but you don't really know it. And that's the challenge that I like. And then hopefully by the end, you may not love these people, but hopefully you'll have empathy. You'll understand. If you had been through what they'd been through, maybe you'd be like them. That's the thing that I suppose I'm interested in. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, definitely for me with Senna, you know, that was the case because before I saw the film, I wasn't particularly interested in motor racing I mean, I'd heard about Senna, but he was just like a name. And then I saw the film and suddenly he became real as a character. And the film really kind of held me. So yeah, I mean, absolutely. But were you fans of these people before you decided to make the films, or
No, do you know, not really. Do you know,
story?
that's the interesting thing. I would say that I've not made films about people because I'm already a fan. I'm the first audience member, right? I'm the first person who there's a gut instinct where you think, oh, they one after the other. With Senna, it was like, I do love sport. I've watched a lot of sport. I play sport. So I do remember that period of Formula One. So, you know, a lot of these films have come out of the 80s and the 90s when I was young. And basically, I would have spent a lot of time on the sofa watching TV. And, you know, when I should have been kind of working or getting a job, and my parents were probably in despair looking at me watching so much sport. Who knew that one day that could be a career? You know, who knew?
Yeah.
So Senna, you know, I was at college probably during that era, and I would stay up late to watch the races in Japan or on the opposite sides of the world. I wasn't a massive fan. When I started making it, I was converted. You know, I became a fan. And then you just think, I love this guy. I think everything he stands for, when I see him speaking, how passionate he is. The interesting thing is, and something that we should talk about as well, because, you know, one of the things that's happened in the last few months, the sadness is of losing Irfan Khan. And actually it was the warrior, which is the reason why the producers asked me to do Senna, because of the spiritual aspect in the warrior. And one of the kind of producers said it's really important aspect of Ayrton Senna's character was his spirituality. And they met a lot of directors, but none of them really understood that. And they'd seen the warrior, and I thought, well, maybe he would be sensitive. And they knew that I was a football fan and a sport fan. So that the warrior is what led to Senna. And it was this balance between the simplifying the story. It's not about the history of Formula One. It's not about 10 drivers, make it about 2. So my reference was actually Raging Bull. You know, if you can make it feel like it's a boxing movie where it's just 2 people in a ring, but it's cars, and even though you don't see their faces and they're wearing helmets, make it about Senna versus Prost, and show these 2 very, very different people. One of them Prost, who would try to win by driving as slowly as possibly, and Senna, who would try to win by driving as fast as possible, and who was very much spiritual and very much more Latin and very emotional, and Prost was calculated and cool. I'm not sure whether they necessarily were like this, but this is the way they were perceived. And the idea to make a virtue of these 2 very different people, but who were in the same car as teammates and who really didn't like each other. For me, that's real kind of drama. So sometimes it's a matter of simplifying the elements and the story to find a way to express it, which then hopefully people who are not Formula One fans like yourself, you're not bothered. I don't really mention the engines. I don't mention the tires. There's no technical stuff. It's literally like red car is good and blue car is bad. You know, if you can simplify it like that, then anyone can get it. And then if you can kind of fall in love with your characters, then whatever Senna does, I want you to feel like you're Brazilian when you're watching that film. And then when you're watching Amy, I want you to think you're like Amy. You're like, you fall in love with her and you want to really feel for her. Because the idea is to tell people the story before they became aware of her. It's the young Amy that is the real Amy, not the person that people saw when she was in a bad way. That's who she became as a subsequence of the issues and the substances, you know, and the problems. And with Diego, again, it's like, if you met Diego, you'd probably like him. Maradona became the persona he created. So if each film, it was about going back and revealing who they were before they were famous and before they became that icon. And that's normally the real person. And then they become something else. And so that's a theme, I suppose, running through them all. They take a long time, I suppose. That's the only other thing I'd say. The film took, Senna was like 5 years. Amy was about 3 years. Diego was about 3 years. So they're quite long. And I've always treated them as feature films. Having come from a background of making drama and feature films, for me, the documentaries are just as important. And I spend just as much time. And the same crew that I work with on the fiction films, whether or not it's the people who do the color timing, whether it's the sound design, the composer, everything that makes a movie feel like a movie is the way the team that I would bring onto a documentary to elevate it, to make it feel like a movie. So hopefully people would go to the cinema when they are cinemas again, go to the cinema to watch them on a big screen. That was always my dream.
Which they did, of course.
Even in India, right? They were in PVR.
Yeah.
People have seen them.
Yeah, they take their time. I mean, that's the other thing, isn't it? When you make a film, you kind of put it out there and you have to be patient because you don't know when it's going to kind of finally reach. And I know Senna has a big audience, fan base in India. It became very popular there. And I think they've all eventually been seen. Yeah, they've all got out there, which is great.
And did the producers come to you for each of these films, or did you choose any of the films? Because
a bit of both, really. I mean, with Senna was the one that I was really hired to make it, and then by the time the next ones came along, because so Senna was definitely, the producers had this idea and they were starting a process, and they spoke to all of the kind of well-known documentary directors in the UK, of which there are many. But luckily for me, they all said no. You know, a big part of filmmaking is luck and being in the right place at the right time. And really, as a director, the only thing you have control over really is your name. What do you say yes to and what do you say no to? And then if you do say yes, how do you kind of make something that is true to you? And for me, generally, the idea is to try to make work which I would go to see myself. You know, make the films that you want to see, not the films that you think people want to see. So Senna, I was a hired director, but then during the process of making it, I tried to make it personal. And that always becomes a bit of a fight. There's always a bit of a tension. And the big way to make it personal, which, you know, now when people look at it, you wouldn't believe it. But when I was asked to make that film, initially it was a more conventional talking heads and archive. And I started making it, and I just had this instinct that there's a much better way to make this film. without any interviews, without any talking heads. In a way, it's almost like taking myself out of the film. You know, that's when you know there's a director. Someone did an interview, you see the bookcase behind them, and you see a little plant on the other side, and they say, oh, you know, that Senna, oh, I remember him, he was great. And you cut to a bit of a car going, meow. I'm like, it's boring. I don't want to do that. I'm like, I want you to watch him. I want Senna to narrate the story, even though he's not alive. He's going to be the narrator, not me. It's not my opinion. That's the other thing about my docs. I'm not in them. Not overtly anyway. You know, I'm not the narrator. It's not my personal journey. I'm not holding the microphone. I want to be invisible, because when you make fiction films, for me, the best directing is the one where the director is invisible, where the story is carried and the characters. So I had quite a bit of a battle sometimes with the producers for them to believe that this could be done entirely with archive. It was still very unusual at the time. Now it's become the norm. Really, post Senna, a lot of people around the world always trying to make films like that. But that was the one where nobody really believed it until they saw. I said, let me show you it. So I showed them a rough cut, which is like 4 hours long. And people were really moved. And they thought, okay, maybe this could work. And then we had to renegotiate the deal to be able to pay for the archive, because there wasn't enough money in the budget initially, particularly Formula One. Sports archive, Formula One archive, very expensive. So we were millions over budget. So I took a big gamble. And this is what you have to do when you're the director. Your job is to kind of gamble. To, if you believe in something, you think it's right, you will find a way to pay for it. So that was the big turning point. With Amy, I was working by then with the producer, and lots of people had approached me for different ideas. And when I got a call about what would you think about doing something about Amy, and I said, number one, you have to have the music and you have the publishing for the songs. You've got to have those. But I said, let me have a think about it. And the more I thought about it, I spoke to Victoria, my wife, and she's a big influence, Amy, for a lot of young women. You know, she really affected people, particularly women. And I thought, having done a very male story with Senna, racing driver, it felt right to do a woman's story in a way, from the woman's point of view. But also the big thing for me was her, when she was alive. I remember seeing her on stage or in newspapers and people talking about it. And I kept thinking, why is nobody looking after her? I don't understand. Why is she on stage? Whose job is it to make sure she's well? And it never made sense. So the film really became a simple way to answer that question that I always had in my head. Why is nobody looking after her? And that's sometimes you just want a very simple device. And with Senna, the idea was we're going to make this film entirely with archive. With Amy, the big idea was I'm going to use the songs and the lyrics. And the lyrics are going to be on screen, because you may know the songs, but you've never really listened to the songs, because they're all pages from her diary. So that was the simple idea, which was to say, if you just listen to the music again, that tells you her story. So that was the big idea there. And then with Maradona, the third one, again, I've been asked, somebody had contacted me about Maradona before I'd made Amy. And I didn't think it was the right time to do it. But when it came back, I thought, okay, this would be interesting as the third one, because he's still alive. So you're dealing with a character who's still alive. I could meet him, I could interview him. But then also during the making of that, I thought we've got to do something different. But also, I think it's a different story. I don't think anyone ever made Diego Maradona do anything he didn't want to do. So that story is all about the internal struggle. There's no external character. There's no person that he's battling with. He may argue with everybody, but actually the biggest argument is in himself. And that's where that film was slightly different.
Do you want to? Yeah.
No, I was going to say, of course, you're credited with this style of of having invented this style of documentary filmmaking, right? Which I think is sometimes referred to as true fiction. Is that?
Yeah, I mean, I might have at one point used that term. I really don't know. I mean, I still haven't come out, but yeah, you're right. I mean, what I don't like is when it's like sort of tragic biogs or something like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, the idea is to make them feel like they're fiction, to make it feel like someone shot it all. That was always my intention, to say, you know, and people still see the films. Really, really, you know, experienced people in the media come up to me and say, so how long were you filming it in Senna for? You know, they still kind of watch them and they don't understand how they're made, which I like, I guess. I think it's, you know, it should feel totally natural and seamless. A mixing of what I found was that another thing that's interesting, Tenzing, is that having made fiction films where I was very obsessed with shooting on 35mm or super 35mm or anamorphic lenses, and the kind of technical aspect was everything. Kind of what I learned with the dogs was to free myself up and to say, even if it's technically poor, If it's emotionally strong, I'm going to use it. And it was really interesting to say, don't get so obsessed with that way something looks. And you know, in contrast with everyone going digital and shooting HD and 4K and 8K or whatever it is, my films have gone the opposite way and become less and less visually, technically perfect. The sound and the music, we try to spend a lot of time and money to make that as good as possible, because if something sounds good, it looks better. But often, you know, with Amy, there's some really poor quality footage, but it's in the film because there was one shot, there was one moment, someone got it. And if you put it in the right place and you tell the story in the right way, the audience will go with it. You know, so I've seen these films on big screen at Cannes, you know, and they stand up because the audience are kind of immersed in the character. And I think that was an interesting, just for me to learn to deal with. It's not about something being perfect. It's about emotionally, what is it saying?
The truth of, yeah. That's really fascinating, because we kind of made a sort of an opposite journey, in the sense that, you know, we started out as documentary filmmakers,
Yeah.
and then very late we got into making fiction. And of course, part of the appeal of the fiction format was really having control over everything, and that idea of being able to shoot, you know, perfect images and all of that. But do you kind of, you know, want to go back to
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I feel like it's time, you know, to go back and to yeah. I mean, I've always gone backwards and forwards. I've actually been making movies while I've been making the documentaries, but the documentaries have become more famous.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is, because they're not just docs, they're not just archive docs, but they're about really iconic people. So you kind of have an audience built in, right? And the idea is, you've got that audience already. Then what you want to do is convert the people who don't believe or who are not fans and bring them with you. And so yeah, the part of the thing was, having made lots of indie type features, you know, Irfan wasn't famous when I made The Warrior with him. He became famous subsequently and became a massive star. And then people wanted to see the film, but it kind of worked inversely, you know, in a backwards way. With Senna, I knew there was a big Formula One fan base. My challenge was to get people who were not into Formula One to watch it. Same with Amy. People know the songs. Amy really was my version of doing like a Bollywood film. The songs came first, right? Everyone knows the songs. The idea is, now let's create a narrative around the songs, so that you already have the tracks in your head. But the idea is, how do I make them feel part of the narrative, integrated in the story? So for me, that was me using kind of the rules almost of like a commercial Indian movie, but within a documentary, so that every time she sings, she's singing from the heart. It's not a recorded performance. It's like a live performance. But what she's saying is what she's feeling at that moment. And so that was a kind of, I forget where I'm going now, but that was, yeah, the idea for that was, we have a fan base. You've already got the records, but you don't really know what you're dancing to. But I when I was making Diego Maradona, I went off to America and I did a TV show called Mindhunter for David Fincher for Netflix. When I was making Amy, I did a feature film called Ali and Nino. So I've basically always done drama and docs at the same time. And now what I want to do, hopefully the kind of next series of films, is somehow to do almost like a hybrid movie, which is a mix between fiction and docs. That's what I'm like working on now in the next one.
I want to go back to something you said. I know, like we both lived in London for 10 years. I know how difficult it can be being Asian there. There are some issues. And the two words you use that come back to me is like, one, being an outsider, and two, being spiritual, you know, it's kind of two strong things that meaning. And does that tie up with your childhood and growing up Asian in England?
I think it has to. Yeah, I mean, it's really, you're right. You know, it was not a conscious decision, but it was, funny enough, it was one of my tutors when I was at art school who looked at all of my short films, and she didn't know me very well. She said they're all about outsiders. And that stayed with me, because I wasn't meaning to do that, but I realized, yeah, that is what they're all about. And then I look now, go, well, all of the films are about that. Evidently, that's how I must feel. And they are about people fighting a system that they are not a part of, or they feel is corrupt, or that is working against them. But I guess that all comes back to how they may not be kind of overtly personal. They may not be about me and about my family or about my street, but they're all about me. And that's the thing, you know, somebody else would take the archive of Senna or take the archive that we found for Maradona and make a very different film. I can imagine another director would have made a film where Maradona had so much fun. What a great life. You know, he partied, he had lots of, you know, he got up to a lot of stuff. He was a great footballer. He won a World Cup. Yay. It wasn't necessarily how I saw the story. You know, I saw someone who kind of wasn't comfortable, wasn't happy. And with him, the child, and not recognizing his own child became a big turning point in his life. So that's where the director's kind of point of view and the way I work with the editor and my team comes in, where you've got to have an idea and an instinct, and then you follow your instinct. But all of that comes back to, yeah, how do you feel, and how do you see the world? What is it you want to say? What do you want to leave behind in your work? Because this is what you think needs to be said. And I think you're right, the spirituality thing, definitely growing up, you know, as a Muslim in London, and that being normal, you know. So a lot of the films that I made before had a magical realism element, which was somehow otherworldly, which kind of was also verging on how do you show that, but in a way which isn't a joke, but is somehow a spiritual aspect, which is in the character. So my student films had that, whether they were in London or when I made The Sheep Thief in India. The Warrior has that, and Senna has that. Irfan, I remember coming to Delhi and showing Irfan Senna, and he was a big fan of it actually. And he said, "Oh, I can see you in this film." And he was one of the first people ever to say, "I can see you in this film." I said, "Where?" He said, "The whole thing of the rain in Senna, and the fact that the rain always comes when Senna needs it to rain." He said, "That's in your short film, The Sheep Thief." And I never connected it, but he could connect the dots between the films. And so there are links. If people have seen enough of the work, and they can kind of, if they know you, then they can see there is a thematic element running through them. So yeah, that was I think you're right there.
Yeah, so you know, both The Sheep Thief and The Warrior were shot in India, right?
Yeah.
So you know, why did you choose India as a location for those films, and what did India mean to you when you were growing up?
Oh wow, that's a really big question, because growing up, you know, my family did not go back to India, so I knew nothing about India. I was one of those people who was very, you know, you grow up confused. You're like, well, am I British or am I Indian? And when you're in Britain, you don't feel particularly British, particularly leaving London. And then I went to India probably for the first time when I was only like 21, with my mum. And I went back there, and what was funny, I remember just one day just standing somewhere. I was just standing still, and someone said, "Where are you from? You're not from around here." And I just thought, I can't even stand still and look like I'm from here, you know. So it was like on this weird thing of on one side, it was the first time genuinely, you know, I'd been to mosques and places like that, but first time genuinely, I looked like everyone around me. Okay, and you didn't realize that growing up in England that was unusual. Because over in England, my friends were from Turkish, or they were Jamaican. You know, it's very multicultural. I grew up in Hackney in the 70s. It's a very mixed multicultural area. So it's a beautiful place. Everyone's from around the world. Everyone speaks more than one language. Everyone has their own kind of food and their culture and their music. And for me, that was normal, that you loved what everyone was into, your friends. That's the great thing about growing up in a poorer part of London. So I went to India, and I just realized, so maybe I'm not that Indian, but I'm not that British. And then it became a kind of realization, do you know what I am? I'm a Londoner. And I will, if you ask me where I'm from, I will always say London. That's who I am. That's where I'm from. And that's home. And I love going to America, and I love coming to India, and I like being halfway in between the two, because I work there and I work in India. I love going to Europe. I love traveling anywhere I can. But London will always be home, because that's kind of where I'm from, and that's where I feel most comfortable. But all of these other things add to who you are, I guess. So The Sheep Thief really subconsciously was, I wanted to make epic movies. I wanted to make films that were kind of on a certain scale. And I had an idea for this kid. A teacher told me a story when I was like 9 years old, our youngest son's age almost, in assembly. And it was like a Bible story about a young kid who steals a sheep, because he's a street kid, steals a sheep, but gets caught and gets branded. And this kid, wherever he goes, will be seen as a thief because he's been branded. And I wanted to tell this story about this thief who's trying to find a family, trying to find the life. But no matter where they go, they're always going to be accused of being a thief. So they can't settle anywhere. So I had this script that I wanted to make, but it just didn't seem like you could do that story in England. You know, this idea of people stealing a sheep and being branded, it feels very dated. And then I kind of thought about doing it in Wales or in Ireland. And then eventually kind of the idea came of, what about doing it in India? And somehow that idea of rural India made sense. Like it could work, it could be period, it could be contemporary, but just somewhere in the middle of nowhere. And that little idea from art school became this film. And then the crew came over and we shot in Gujarat and in Rajasthan. And it was an amazing experience, probably still the toughest film I've ever made, that student film.
Right.
But it was also kind of life-changing in so many ways, because that student film ended up going to Cannes and won a prize. And because of The Sheep Thief, I was able to get the funding to make The Warrior, which was a continuation of that style of a British Londoner making a film in India, but which isn't typically what everyone from England assumed was an Indian movie. It wasn't a Bollywood type film, but it was a European Indian film. And I suppose that's where I was coming from. So even when I made The Warrior, I remember showing it in Bombay for the first time. And there were a lot of journalists there and nobody got it. Everyone's like, what is this?
Right.
No one even talks. And you know, it was like, this is like, why have you tried to make it in Hindi? And I'm like, why not? They're like, you're from England, you should make it in English. And then in England, they were like, this is a bit weird. You're making a film not with any British actors, and you're making it with Indian, because it was not the done thing in 2000 to make a British film not in English with Indian actors entirely. No one had done that. No one was doing it. This is years before things like Slumdog and everything.
Right.
So it was really interesting. So even when I was making films, it was a bit of an outsider, right? It wasn't typically British and it wasn't typically Indian. It was like this weird in-between space. But then it started to go down well and it won awards, and suddenly it won the BAFTA for Best British Film the next year. And then in India, all the journalists who said, what is this film? Why are you making it? We're like, Indian film wins BAFTA. You know? So, you know, the older success has many fathers and failure is an orphan is a good line there. So it became kind of like this, weirdly enough, became for me an excuse to spend more time in India, but also visually, I don't know anywhere that's as stunning as shooting in India. And meeting people like Irfan and working with people like Amit, my friend, and having like a crew and a team, but being able to tell spiritual epic stories on an amazing canvas. And, you know, just about speaking the language and just about being able to do films on a grander scale. But let's be honest, it's cheaper to work in India than it would be to do that in America or somewhere else. So, and actually, let me go back one other thing. Originally, The Warrior, I wanted to shoot in Japan.
Okay.
It was a samurai film. I wrote it as a samurai film.
Right.
And there's no way I could get the money of my first film to shoot in Japan. I didn't speak Japanese. I'd never been there at the time. So it was actually a rewrite that set it in India.
Right.
So it's funny how these, because the original story for The Warrior is a Japanese folktale, which I then relocated to India.
Right.
So that was kind of how all of these stories that you grow up hearing and you take and you mix them together and you say, well, how do I make this personal? And also secretly thinking, how can I make a film when if they fired me, who are they going to get to direct this? That's what I was thinking. If I do this film, who else is going to take over? And the great thing about shooting in Rajasthan, I remember at the time, this is the truth, that all of the insurance people came over, all of the producers wanted to come, oh, India would be great. They all came for the technical scout. I'll be honest, this is the truth. Everyone got ill. Right. No one came to visit when we were shooting. They were like, no, you carry on. So it was the most relaxed, idyllic experience on a film ever, you know, because we were just left alone. There was no pressure. It was my first film. All of the crew were like, almost at the stage of the beginning of their own careers, including people like Irfan, who was kind of not known. You had all of this cast and crew, and still it's the one film where we still have reunions on The Warrior, because everyone had like a life-changing experience on that film.
Tenzing and I saw that film when we lived in London. I think either at the ICA or the BFI. Now we can't remember one. And was like really talked about, and you know there was a kind of Indian name attached to it.
Yeah.
And we saw it as a spaghetti western kind of
that
genre,
or samurai,
but we weren't sure. I mean, really, to tell you the truth, we weren't sure.
No one. Because it was a mixture of all sorts of things. It wasn't this, it wasn't that, but that was like, I suppose that was me. I love spaghetti westerns. I love Sergio Leone.
Right.
But I love like samurai films, and I love, the Kurosawa. But then I can't do that there, so let me do my version of it. Right. And I remember I saw a box of like newspapers, and they were all like I can't remember, but they were all quite, now you would say they were quite racist headlines of how they termed it, you
Right.
know, masala western or whatever they called it, you know, because everyone was trying to figure out what the hell is this.
Put a stamp, you know, to kind
Yeah.
of,
But I
yeah.
think that's what you meant to do with your first film. You know, you should not worry about what everyone else is doing. You should just do your thing, which is unique to you.
And have you ever thought of making another film in India, or
Yeah,
ever
yeah,
tried
yeah.
to
I
shoot
mean,
it?
right now my friend Amit is doing a series, and I'm one of the producers on it. So he's doing a show for Amazon. So I was last year. Um, we were over there while the shoot was going on. And so that's it in post. So yeah, I would like to come back. I mean, it's really sad. I don't know how somehow I didn't end up working with Irfan again. You know, there was always a plan for us to do
Right.
something again. But yeah, there is definitely the hope to come back. But everything's changed so much. You know, it's not. It's you know, the answer is yes. It's just more complicated the way the world is right now. It's more complicated when you've got older kids and everything, and it's the whole being away for such a long time is the challenge. But I'm definitely hoping to come back. What I'd like, the answer is yes, and I want to come back to the mountains and make a film, definitely. You know, I always wanted to do something in Ladakh. That was
Yeah.
always one of my hopes, to shoot somewhere around there.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, Ladakh is an incredible location.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's where we went on our honeymoon, actually.
Oh,
So
right.
that's the place that I would like to shoot, somewhere up near you, but maybe even further up.
Mhm, mhm.
And work, I mean, I guess, you've talked a lot about working with Irfan and him not being there anymore. But since, I think a lot of Indian audiences are going to be watching this, is there anything you want to talk about? I know you said I want to come back to Irfan, but,
Yeah.
it was like working with him and, how you'd work with
Oh gosh, I mean,
I know.
he was in London for a while when he was ill. He was having treatment here, so we saw him quite a lot. Obviously now not enough, um, but it was it's an interesting time. It's really strange because it was at the beginning of lockdown this happened, and to not be able to go to a funeral, not to just see something on social media to say he was buried the next day, it was just so peculiar. It was quite hard, actually. It kind of took quite a while to get over it. His eldest son, was at university here. So every now and again, he'd for example, when we were editing Maradona, Irfan used to come to the edit suite or come to screenings, and while he was in London having his treatment, and we'd spend a bit of time where we'd go to the park and chat. And then, I kept thinking, oh, one day, what I'd like to do is maybe just do an interview. Why don't I just film you? And he'd be like, yeah, let's do that. And it was one of those things where I kept delaying it. I should have just done it. I kept
Right.
thinking I would do it next time. And he'd say, well, maybe not today. I'm not feeling great. And then it was just that thing that you kept pushing back. And then eventually he the diagnosis wasn't good. And then he decided to go back to Bombay. So then I was in India. I'm losing track of time because this year has been such a peculiar one. But I did see him in Bombay one last time with his wife and his kids at home. And he looked frail. He'd lost a bit of weight, but he felt positive. But by then, I think he knew, and we all knew that he wasn't gonna recover. And then this is one of the challenges, of what we're talking about, right? We are this year, everything's become a series of Zoom calls. Life is just one Zoom call after another. But before that, it wasn't really that wasn't what we were doing. Okay, it wasn't normal. So it was always a weird thing to kind of live in London, but to have really good friends who lived on the opposite side of the world in India. And you'd see like people once a year if you were lucky. If I went to India, I'd see Amit, I'd see Irfan, or if they came here, Irfan was working here, he'd always invite me over if he was doing a movie or something. But it's such a strange way to think, oh God, we made The Warrior in 1999, 2000, 20 years ago. But in that time, I didn't spend enough time with him. And I didn't get around to making another film. He had this amazing career in Hollywood and everything, and in India. So it's just, he was like family. That's what I'd say. He was like a brother, and he was like really good guy, never changed, really good heart. No matter how successful he became, he always mentioned The Warrior as being like the beginning of his journey. He always made a point of saying, I started there. And that always meant a lot, because you see him with Slumdog at the Oscars, or you see him with Ang Lee and he dropped the warrior into conversation. You know, it was kind of like this thing where he just would know that, you know what, that's where it started. And so that always meant a lot. And it's very sad. Yeah.
Nice. Okay, to change the subject totally, we know from your tweets that you're a big Liverpool fan, right?
how can you tell?
All those nervous kind of tweets as the match is going on.
I know, it's so bad. It's like you lose control when you know there's quite a few serious people I'm sure follow me, like, who is this idiot? Like, when there's a game on, I become a bit of a football idiot, but you know, what can you do?
Well, I'm an Arsenal fan, and I know exactly what it means to.
Yeah, exactly. But, you've got to have something where you have absolutely no control of it, but you think you do, which distracts you from all the other shit in life. You know, you've got to have something.
Yeah.
If all you do is worry about the state of the world and corrupt politicians and COVID, then you know. And you know, much as I love film, I'll be honest, football came first.
Right. So does like your love of football in any way kind of cross over into your films in some way? Do you think there's any kind of?
No, I mean, I play football, and I still play football, and I like watching football, and generally it's something outside. Obviously Maradona is about a footballer, but I haven't really tried to make films about like my favorite player or my favorite team, although I think Klopp is a very interesting character and a very spiritual character. Actually, that's one of the reasons why I think he's different. The way he comes across, if you look at all of the people that he has brought to the team, a lot of them are very religious, overtly religious, Brazilians and players from Africa and Asia. So I think he's a really fascinating character. Maybe one day, but generally it's like quite happily like a parallel thing, and not directly. If you wanted to look into it, you know, the idea of being a manager or being a coach, or whatever, is a lot of like being a director in a way, managing the egos, managing people, getting a performance, getting something. There are, I suppose, similarities in terms of, you know, the narrative of what you're trying to do, but no, it's just a bit of fun, or not. Most of the time, it's hell.
I know.
I do miss going to a stadium, though. You know, it's such a weird thing. Idea, that kind of collective experience. It's not the same watching it on TV with an empty stadium. It's really not the same.
Right.
Yeah, and it's not the same watching movies online, though. It's better than nothing.
Yeah.
Same, you know, it's not the same, you know, coming and having tea and pakoras and doing all of that we did, you know, it's not the same. But
yeah, the collective experience, you know, it's when there's a lot of, you forget how important that all is in life, you know, meeting strangers and talking to people and sharing something. Yeah. Hopefully we'll get back to some form of normality, hopefully.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be an altered normality, but not as strange and surreal as it is now. You know?
Yeah.
Hopefully.
So at your festival, are you not able to do any kind of outdoor screenings or anything? It's just not allowed.
No, I mean, they wouldn't allow it, and it's just not you know, in India, because not everyone's wearing masks, and people are careful, so we didn't want to do that at all.
Okay, right.
It's totally you know, online this year, and but still a lot of people are getting very excited and they're watching films, so it's great. But next year we hope for the 10th anniversary it will be live, you know, like it'll be the real thing.
Yes,
we'll get together, so we're hoping for that. I don't know how we're doing for time, but maybe we should go to Q&As. I think there are some. How's time for you?
Yeah, okay.
Okay, we have a few questions from the audience that were sent to us earlier. So one of them says, your new project, Laika, about the first living creature to go to space aboard the Russian Sputnik, will be made using XR, extended reality technology. That sounds really exciting. Can you tell us more about the project and how it differs from conventional filmmaking?
Good question. So yes, so I read a graphic novel about 3 or 4 years ago called Laika, by Nick Abadzis, who is a Londoner who lives in New York. And I remember reading it with the kids and thinking, do you know what? I'd love to do an animation. I'd love to. I always like playing with different genre. I think it's kind of fun to test yourself in different forms. And so I tried to get the rights. And in the end, I just didn't know how to make an animated film. I was busy on some other projects at the time. So it went away. And this often happens. You have a project or you have an idea and then it goes away and then it comes back again. So then out of the blue last year, I was asked by the London Film Festival that to make a short film for them. And they wanted to do a VR film or whatever I wanted to do. They would say they'd give us some money and they would show it at the festival. And there's an organization at the National Film School here that has an immersive center, which is all to do with AR, VR, XR, everything. So I thought, okay, I'll do it. So it was like almost like a commission. And the idea was to get somebody who's never made an AR film or an XR film before me. And for me to bring in a group of people who also maybe have made films, but have never done anything like in VR. So that was the idea. And initially, my plan was to do a 360 film where you put on a headset and you see the world around you. And I wanted to do a really epic film where I would travel around the world and I'd shoot things. And very quickly I realized, well, that could be interesting, but that's not really using VR in the best way, maybe. Also, luckily I didn't do that because this year I wouldn't have been able to travel anywhere. So funny enough, during lockdown, one of the main things that happened was we were writing the script for a space movie about a dog that goes to space. And that was definitely something you can do while you're locked down, right? You can write. And so we've been working on it and we're still at quite an early stage, but it's been really interesting. I was on the jury for Venice this year for the VR section, which I'll say it quietly, don't tell anyone. I was supposed to do it last year, okay, and I couldn't do it because I was trying to finish the Maradona film. So I said, ask me next year. So they asked me this year, and of course it's during lockdown, right? So I ended up I only wanted to go do it because I could go to Venice. I ended up doing the whole thing from Hoxton in East London, wearing a headset. But I saw some amazing films. It was really fantastic, and I genuinely think, having seen, some of the world's best work while on the jury at Venice, I do think it's an art form that is pushing movies and pushing cinema into new places. I think I was an absolute cynic at the beginning. I wear glasses, I get headaches and migraines. I find a lot of the headsets really uncomfortable. But once I found the kind of headsets that suited me, and once I saw some really great work, I think it's amazing. I think it's really amazing. I think it's coming, and I think it's something that people who are interested in kind of trying out something new, once you see the good work, you'll realize what is capable and what is possible. So I'm in the middle of trying to do my own one, and it's not a big budget thing, but I'm pushing what little money we have, as always, as far as I can. And I just thought, I'd love to do a space film. I'd love to do sci-fi, and this is the excuse to try my hand at a genre which I haven't worked in before.
And is it all done on the computer? I mean, you don't actually shoot anything.
Yeah, I mean, there may be some motion capture elements, which are, where you put a person in a suit and you shoot them. Right now, it's essentially an entirely created universe. Yeah. So it's gonna be kind of animated, mixed with kind of 3D elements, which will be probably not 360, but it might be like 180 or 200 degrees vision. So you look around. So because once you get into full 360, excuse me, if you've not tried it before, it can make you feel a little bit seasick.
Right.
Have either of you tried anything like this?
We had at some festivals.
Yeah.
Went to a couple of festivals where we bought these headsets, and it's amazing.
Yeah, once you get used to it and you get your bearings and you trust it, you have to leave the world behind in a way, and you have to go with it, and you can't be there thinking, oh, where's my rucksack or my bag or my handbag, because that's one of the things. When I first tried it at Sundance about 6-7 years ago, I remember being in a really busy bar and they were handing out these headsets, and I put it on and I just kept being very self-conscious that there were people around me. And you need to somehow have a bit of space. You need to be able to move around and walk around and lean and experiment with it. But I think it's really interesting. And it's just another way of the medium pushing boundaries, I think.
Another question is, how important is the commercial viability of your projects to you?
I think you have to be aware of it. You have to be aware of it. Films are not cheap. They cost a lot of money. I mean, one of the things that I've made films that are quite expensive. I've also made cheap films, but generally my docs have all been around the same budget, which are, for documentaries, they're quite expensive, but because of the nature of the characters and because of the fact that they've been made with archive, and because I knew that there was potentially a fan base there, we knew what they might be capable of. So my documentaries have always been in pounds around £2 million, 2.2 million, which is quite expensive for docs, but which a lot of, with Netflix and Amazon and Apple, the budgets have been going up. Particularly the marketing has gone up a lot. That's what I'd say. It was one of the challenges, from having made feature films, which were around a similar budget initially, but which struggled much more at the box office in a way. They took a longer time to find an audience. It was harder for them to make profit. And then the easier thing to do if you want to make features would be to work with more well-known movie stars and to do kind of scripts that are with studios, which I could have done, but I was less interested in that kind of work. So one of the reasons I ended up going to documentaries as well was that I could do, in a way, Senna, Amy, and Maradona did really well internationally. So they're almost like blockbuster documentaries, but which were made for a low budget in terms of feature films, but made a lot of money and were seen by a lot of people. So I suppose in the end, I'm making films. I'm spending years of my life making a movie. I do want the audience to see them. I think it is important that they get seen. It's not the only thing, but it is important that they get out there. And I did have a hard time with some of the feature films that I made, having put life and soul into them. To know that nobody's ever seen them is quite hard to keep doing that. Not only keep doing that, it's hard for people to keep giving you the money to keep doing it. Let's be honest. That's the truth, right? So you've got to kind of find the balance and find your place where you are feeling creatively like you're able to express yourself, but also you want the audience to see it. And if it does well, that's even better. That's a nice bonus. Okay. I think it's the reality of movies, though. They cost a lot of money. And at some point, the people giving you the money will probably want to see some of that money coming back.
We know.
We know.
It's always a tough slog. But
what I would say, it's a really interesting conversation because, what happened is when I started off, I was making films on film. And then I've gone over and I've made films now on digital and I've made films using archive. But because of Amy was a big hit, everybody wanted the next film. Like all of the streamers were really, really interested and they were making big offers. Before we'd even made Maradona, they wanted it. And I had this instinct that somehow the three films together are like a family and there's a trilogy there. And I wanted Maradona to be a theatrical film. I wanted it to be seen by a live audience, lots of people sitting together in Argentina, in Napoli, in England. I wanted it to feel like a collective experience because I remember thinking to myself that this might be the last movie that I make. Now, we didn't know COVID was going to come along. We didn't know what was going to happen in 2020. But actually, the fact that we made this film, that it was seen at the cinema, I've seen it in Cannes, I've seen it in audiences in Italy, I've seen it with audiences in Argentina, I've seen it in all over Europe and in England. And then the world's changed, and who knows when we're going to come out of this. And so I'm kind of glad that I stuck with that because it was, we had an incredible open air screening in Amsterdam at the football stadium where Johan Cruyff used to play. And it was an incredible experience at night to see it in a stadium. And now this is like an impossible dream, So now more and more it's all changed. Now more and more it's going to be streamers who are going to take control of this situation, get everyone paying their subscriptions. Everyone just sits at home, watches stuff on their own. And I think it's going to change. I think it's going to be a real battle to get out of this back to where we were, I have to say, unfortunately. So movies are going to change. And in that case, your budgets and who you're making an audience for, how do you even know how many people have seen your film? You just don't know. It ends up in an algorithm somewhere. And if you're lucky, someone might put something on social media, but generally you don't have that immediate reaction from an audience. I think that's going to be a big learning curve for a lot of people.
That's interesting. That was the last question that somebody had, which was, your films are very cinematic. How do you feel about people watching your film on a mobile phone, iPad, etc., in this increasingly digital world, especially during the pandemic? So I think
Yeah,
you.
I mean, that is a question, but in the past, it was like you start off on a big screen and then you go to kind of Blu-ray DV, and then you go to Blu-ray, and then you go to your, streaming, and then you end up on a phone. In the end, you just want people to see your work. And we know that younger audiences view things differently. I know that I view things differently than I used to. Main thing is that people see it. I think, I'm kind of always being torn between this idea of having made movies that studios owned and then wouldn't show. I was always one of those people saying, well, even if someone's seeing an illegal version, at least they're seeing it, because the studios were very good at controlling the kind of entire industry to serve themselves. And sometimes with my early films, not even letting me show them when people wanted to show them. The big example was The Warrior, right? It came out in the UK, it was a success in the UK, but the rest of the world, it was bought by Harvey Weinstein, and it was bought by Miramax. Okay. And I had my own experiences with him, and him saying, unless I sign a 3-picture deal with Miramax, he won't release it. Having told everyone how much he loved it, having told everyone how brilliant the film was and how much he thought it was one of the best films of the year, he basically said, if I don't sign a deal with him, he will make sure no one ever sees it. And I didn't sign a deal with him because I didn't want to work with him. And so he killed the film. And even now, it's really hard to show The Warrior in America or around the world because they still own it.
You still own it. Crazy.
They still own it, right? They buy it. And so I remember when that deal got done, everyone's like, oh, great, this is so fantastic. But it was good for the people who made the film because they got their money back. Right. But the studios control you. And I think that's always been one of the challenges of, how you just want the audience to see the work that you've spent years making. If they watch it on their phone, I don't mind, as long as you see it. I'd rather they saw it on a big screen, but sometimes the system works in such a way that becomes impossible.
And I guess before the studios control things, and now it's more and more likely that the OTT platforms are really going to have us. And how is that going to change? How the future is going to look for smaller filmmakers, people who want to do more experimental work?
I think in certain ways it's working better because I feel like they're getting more opportunities. I do think people appear to be trying to give opportunities to a more diverse range of filmmakers, more women filmmakers, more people of color. I definitely think that they're aware now that something has to happen, and they're moving faster in certain ways than the old-fashioned studios. Which, I remember one of my agents in America years ago just saying, it's all Marvel movies now. It's all superheroes. That's all they want to see. It's kind of like franchises. It's kind of book out of nothing original is going to get made. He said this to me like 15 years ago, and that's where we're at. An original screenplay is the worst thing in the world, right? They want a book that's already been a hit. They want to adapt that, or you just want to make a franchise movie again and again and again. And I think that is a big part of the reason why there was a space in the market for the streamers to come into. Because that's where the studios decided that's where their money was. That's all they cared about. And a lot of indie films got dropped. And funnily enough, the genre that stepped into that gap, I would say, was documentary. Because suddenly the indie drama market looked like it was really struggling. Still in Cannes and Venice, you had great films being made, but in America and the UK, it was struggling. And then docs came along, and they became more popular. People wanted to watch real stories or real characters or something in contrast to superhero movies. And I think that's really shot up and become much more popular. Netflix, you had House of Cards, but a lot of Netflix's name was built by the documentary that they did, that Making a Murderer and various things like that became massive hits worldwide. And I think that's where nonfiction has really, it's done well, I have to say. And they put a hell of a lot of money behind it, and I think that's something that's positive, I suppose, for documentary filmmakers.
Okay, all right. I guess
I think we'll.
I know you have to leave.
There's so many other things we could talk about. We haven't even touched scratched the surface of your, how you go about making films like Amy and Maradona, but we leave that for another time.
Next time we'll do it in person.
We'll do it in person.
Right. Let's do that. And thank you so much for joining us and being on our advisory board. And
yes, absolutely.
We will come and talk again about some of those things.
Thank
And
you. It's good to see you
congratulations
both.
on all these awards you've been
Yeah,
winning.
you won the BBC Grierson
Yeah.
Trustees Award, which is really fantastic. So yeah,
Yeah,
congratulations.
that's a pretty biggy one. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So that's coming up in a week or so. Yeah. Which
Yeah.
it'll all be virtual, it'll be me on another Zoom call.
Right.
It
That's the
also shows how old you're getting when you start getting these kind of lifetime achievement things. Oh my God, how did that happen? But it's great.
right. Okay.
Thank you.
All
Thank you
right.
so
Thank
much.
you.
And yeah, catch up with you soon.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Yeah,
Bye.
good luck with everything. Bye.
Yeah,
Thank
thank
you.
you.
See you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.